Hi, everyone, and welcome to a practical path for creating accessible documents with Microsoft Word. Just brief introductions. This webinar is brought to you by AT&NH Assistive Technology in New Hampshire. That is New Hampshire's statewide assistive technology program. Assistive Technology in New Hampshire, AT&H, has two major activity areas: training, education, and outreach, and assistive technology services such as equipment demonstrations, loans, and refurbishing and reuse. If you have any questions for the AT&NH staff, you can contact them at 603-862-4320 or assistive.technology@unh.edu. Or you can also learn more about AT&NH on their website at atnh.org. The AT&NH is funded under grant 1601 NH-SGAT from the Administration on Community Living, or the ACL. Hi, my name's Art. I will be your main tour guide through this webinar. My name is Art Frick. This is important that you guys know this is the best picture that I've ever taken. It's also somewhat subject to to some scrutiny by my wife, who has conveniently cropped out of it. This was at a wedding. Anyway, way more info than you guys need to know. Anyway, I work at the Institute on Disability at the University of New Hampshire, where I am the Web Services Manager. I've been at the IOD since August 2012, and I've been working in the web space since 2006. My work at the Institute on Disability is really around everything web and internet and somewhat technology based. So I fix a lot of problems. I make things more accessible. And I help grant writers with technical specs, and when I'm not doing any of that, I build websites with Drupal. The counterpart to this webinar today is Stacy Driscoll. She is the Assistive Technology Specialist and the Program Coordinator at AT&NH. She's been with the IOD since 2014, and she's provided services to individuals with disabilities for over 25 years. Worked as both elementary and special ed teacher in multiple school districts in New Hampshire. So that's a little bit about us. Concerning the format and housekeeping of the webinar today, if you need this webinar in alternative formats, please email us. You will be muted on entry to keep the background noise down throughout the webinar. We will have time towards the end of the webinar for Zoom for question and Q&A. So if you can, just use the chat feature or the Q&A feature that is present in the Zoom interface on your screen. Downloads, transcripts, and sample files are available for review at the links provided. The links will also be shown throughout the cart caption down at the bottom of the screen, and they are also here for you. There's the URL, https://unh.app.box.com/v/access-word-downloads. Also, I know that some of you have received all of these files well in advance, but please make sure that you are using the latest version of the documents, and by that I mean make sure that you're viewing the latest version of the PowerPoint if needed. As I did update it, as most recently as about 35 minutes ago. Okay, what else do we have going on? If you have if you can connect with us on Twitter. You can tweet to us at UNHIOD and use the hashtag #AccessibleDocs. So it's important in talking about this webinar that we have some technical assumptions, right? We're assuming that you have a basic knowledge of Microsoft Word. And well, what's a basic knowledge? We're assuming that you can do things like open a document, you can apply formatting to texts, and you can place pictures in documents. We're also going to be using the current version of Office 365 on a PC. So that's Word 2016. However, for everyone, most features are available in generally the post-2013 editions, and that's regardless of whether you're using a Mac or a PC. So what are we covering today? Today, we are going to do a quick overview of digital accessibility. We're going to talk about why accessibility is important. And then we're going to do, this webinar is a little bit different in that there are two different sections. There's going to be a theoretical part, and then there's going to be a practical applications part. So basically, the first part of the webinar is going to be me talking to everybody about things, and then the second part of the webinar is going to be me walking you through how to do various things in the actual software. So it's somewhat unconventional, and it's the first time that we've done this. So bear with me if there are any technical hiccups or any glitches like that. It's important to note that this will be recorded. So if you have any issues in opening any of the documents, or you have any issues in technology or anything like that, it will all be recorded and all of it will be made publicly available. We will send out an email follow-up to everyone. And I can see that Stacy just posted a link to the direct download for all of the for the PowerPoint and the sample documents. So anyway, back to document accessibility. We're going to talk about that in Microsoft Word. Sort of the theoretical parts that we're going to be talking about today are headings, links. We're going to talk about alt text. We're going to discuss some image positioning, and we're going to talk about the accessibility checker that's built into Microsoft Word. Then after we cover all that, we're going to go into the practical application. We're going to have a very important message from Stacy at ATN&H, and then we're going to talk about a conclusion. So one thing that's important to think about in that our prevailing thought slide here, which is novel, is that we all do better when we all do better. And I included this because I think accessibility is something that, as probably most of us are workers in the accessibility space or the disability space, is that we all know that we should be doing these things, but you know, accessibility takes time, and it's up to each of us to spend the time to make sure that the documents that we put out into the world are made accessible so that we can really reach as broad an audience as possible. And so we all do better when we all do better. And part of that is the scope of this webinar is to give everyone some basic skills to make all of their documents much more accessible and actionable items that you can do starting today. So with that, I want to just briefly outline some sort of guiding digital accessibility and inclusion principles. So why we do this thing at a very high level is online and digital document accessibility helps provide equal access to people with diverse abilities. So, you know, if you have somebody with an ambulatory disability or someone with a vision impairment, those disabilities, provided you're dealing with accessible technologies, are dramatically reduced when you're in the digital world. So by doing what we can do to ensure what we're putting out there is accessible, we're basically reducing the impact that disability has on people. So another thing that I think is interesting is that the UN Convention on Rights with Persons with Disabilities regards access to information and communication technologies as a basic human right. There's additionally, as some of us who work in the nonprofit and federal space know, there are federal guidelines. There's Section 504 of the American Rehabilitation Act, and that discusses a lot about the inclusion regardless of ability. There's also the Section 508 of the American Rehabilitation Act of 1973, and the standards refresh that really just happened this year speaks to the utilization of modern inclusive practices for information and communication technology, or ICT standards and guidelines. There's a fantastic webinar and more details on the standard refresh at the Great Lakes ADA Center. And also, one thing that I did want to talk about is this last bullet point, which is making poor websites. So all of the things that we're going to talk about today are really rooted and can be brought into the sphere of making accessible websites. So when I say make a poor website, we're talking about making things that are perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. So what each of those points mean is that a perceivable website is something that looks and it looks and it acts and it feels the way that it should. Like, we've all been on really great intuitive websites that you can just navigate with and through easily. And that ties into operability, where things look and feel and you can interact and use them across a variety of devices. And then the understandable part of the poor principles is that language and supplemental representations are available so that as many people as possible can read and digest and interpret what you're trying to say. And then lastly, we're talking about robustness. So we're not using antiquated or odd technologies that only a select few people have access to. So anyway, there's a lot more that you can dive into that. I would advise everyone to really take a look at the core principles of web accessibility. A quick Google search can reveal a lot of resources on that. So that being said, let's talk about Microsoft Word. And today I figured that it was important that we start off with something that wasn't such a great idea, which is Clippy. Clippy was ridiculous. In fact, there's a lot of debate internally at the Institute on Disability, but one thing that I did find out today, this is for Anna, is that in 2010, Time Magazine said it was one of the worst 50 inventions. So there we go. Terrible, terrible invention, Clippy, and we're still glad he's gone. So Microsoft Word. So, you know, we want to think of documents as web pages, as I said. You know, the same principles apply, the perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust principles. Again, quick Google search when you have time. I could devote an entire webinar on just the core principles, which is something that we may look forward to doing. I think it would be very beneficial. Another thing is that we want to reiterate the fact that accessible documents don't mean boring documents. We don't have to use, you know, a 12-point Times New Roman for everything. We just have to be cognizant of how we're applying styles and features and things. Another thing to think about is Microsoft Word is wired to create fully accessible documents. We're able to easily manage things like headings and links and alt text and images throughout them. So that being all said, let's go and figure out how we can dive in and do this. So one of the chief things that is at the root of web accessibility in terms of navigating with things like screen readers is headings. Headings need to be selected based on their hierarchy in the document. Whereas heading 1 might be a title, whereas heading 2 might be a chapter. So it's important to think about how you're structuring your document. And that's good not only for readability and understandability, but it's also good for navigating with assistive technology. And that's really what we're taking out here. Another tidbit is items of equal importance should have the same heading values. So, and it's important that we don't skip headings. So how do you do this, right? That's what we're all here to do. So headings can be applied directly from the main home tab. And it looks roughly something like this. Heading 2 can be accessed through many of the main navigation parts. You can also right click and tool around, but primarily it's navigated to and adjusted through the home tab. If you right click and modify, you can change the style of the headings. And again, we can look at some of this stuff when we go to the practical application of the webinar in a few. And again, you can click the format button and it'll give you access to the various font attributes. So we're not really stuck in Calibri or Times New Roman. You can pick whatever fonts you want. As long as you're applying the headings accessibly and correctly, everything will be accessible, as long as you don't have like a crazy illegible font. So the next part that I want to talk about are links. The biggest thing that I see as somebody that looks at things with an eye on accessibility is that we want to make sure that we're writing links that make sense out of context. And we'll get into this in the next slide, but we want to make sure that as we go through here, that all of our links do make sense out of context, that there's no click here, read more instructions. You know, it's important that these things make sense. So if you were to navigate by assistive technology, you could understand what you're supposed to be clicking on. It's also important that we maintain the standard that links are underlined and have a different value than the main text. So we want to make sure that we're clear as to what you're looking at and what the expected operation would be if you were to click it. And lastly, if you're using an image as a link, we want to make sure that you include the destination. You should include that in your alt tag, and we'll get to applying alt tags in a little bit later in the session. So this is one of my favorite slides that I've ever happened upon, and it's basically a very clear understanding of what unclear link text examples are, and thus what usable link text examples are. So things like click here for instructions on how to use. Learn more about color and accessibility here and here. Story 1, read more. Story 2, read more. Accessibility 101, register. Accessibility 102, register. Okay, so if we were to read these out loud, as one might with a screen reader, you would hear click here, here, read more, register, which isn't usable. If you were browsing via link, that would be a completely useless exercise because we would have no context where click here is going to. We would have no understanding that if I was talking about color and accessibility, I would click here and here because I can't visually understand where that's coming from. So one thing that I like to pair this with is the usable link text. So something like instructions for the new IOD website are available online, where instructions for the new IOD website is the link. You can learn more about accessibility in terms of accessible contrast and color coding for accessibility. And you can have a great story 1 and another great story 2. And you can register for accessibility 101 or accessibility 102. So we can see, if we were to go through these, that if I read these out as maybe a screen reader would, the links that you would hear would be instructions for the new IOD website, accessible contrast, color coding for accessibility, link, a great story 1, link, a great story 2. So sorry about that, everyone. Just a quick little technical hiccup, but I think we got that figured out. All right. So anyway, back to alt text. So sort of in the world of having things like alternative text, we want to make sure we're talking about specifically alternative text with images here. Images, graphics, tables, complex images. We want to make sure that we're providing sufficient information so that users who are unable to see these items are still able to understand what they convey. We want to limit this alt text to about 120 characters for simple images. Again, you can do things like long descriptions, and you can even extend that if you really need the real estate to adequately convey what's going on. One thing that I try to do, you know, we are a lot of research. We do a lot of research at the Institute on Disability, and one thing that I think is a great practice is alt text for things like graphs, tables, and complex images should give a brief summary of the information. Like what am I going to try to understand and process from looking at these graphs? So we understand, like, if we're looking at a downward trend line on a graph, it might be worthwhile to explain that via alt text. And then the last thing is that we really don't need alt text for purely decorative images. So how do we apply that, right? So we insert our image, and then we right-click on the image and select Format Picture from the drop-down. So and again, we will walk through all of this later. This is just merely for some visual understanding here. So right-click, drop-down, Format Picture. Format Picture, the sidebar should open. You're going to see something similar to this depending on Mac or PC. All of them operate very similarly, and especially in the later versions. So for instance, with this image, it might be worthwhile to say yellow tulips in a field. And oh, I'm sorry, I got ahead of myself. Anyway, we would click the Layout and Properties button, which is this little guy here, this little this cross hatch with the position bars on the sides. And then we always want to fill in the description field, as not all screen readers will acknowledge the title field. One thing that is somewhat interesting in that is image positioning. And we should always keep images in line with text, as that ensures assistive technology will read the positioning of the image at the right place in the document. So sometimes when we do, and we want to make sure that we're placing all of our images in line with text, as some screen readers will throw the images maybe all the way up at the top. Some will throw them all the way at the bottom. Some will jostle them in the middle somewhere. And it's important that, you know, we want these things to be read in the order that they were intended. And by placing items in line with text will ensure that your alt tags and your images are related correctly to the content. So one of the last parts in our theoretical exploration of Microsoft Word is the accessibility checker. Word 2016 specifically comes with an accessibility checker. I believe some of the previous versions of that go as well. Include the accessibility checker as well. I don't think that it's fantastic, but it is useful for helping individuals find items that perhaps they've overlooked. You can access it by clicking File if you're on a PC, and then check accessibility in the submenu. You can also find it under Review if you're on a Mac, or even if you're on some versions of the PC software. It's fairly easy to find. I would recommend that if you're having trouble finding it, you can also do a quick Google search, and it should point you in the right direction depending on your version. So on this particular view, which was on Microsoft Word 2016, it was under Review, Check Accessibility. It'll alert you, and it will also give you suggestions on how to best remediate the errors that you find, which is also super helpful, especially when you get into different kinds of more esoteric accessibility issues. I wouldn't recommend that you take this as the end-all for document accessibility. And you'll find if you run a quick accessibility checker on the unaccessible sample in the files that were provided, you'll find that it doesn't catch all of the errors, and that's really quite a telling example. So perhaps I believe one of the errors, if you run it on the unaccessible sample, is it'll read that it does have alt text, but if you look at that alt text on the two cat images, they are completely wrong. So it's important that we not always take this accessibility checker for what it is, and it doesn't really ever beat out a thorough manual review. But again, something is better than nothing, and that I think is a worthwhile thing to point out. So practical application. I figured that we would start this off with Lynx the cat. While albeit he's somewhat cuter than Clippy, we're still kind of glad he's gone, albeit cute. For the practical application part of the webinar, we're going to be using Microsoft Office 365 2016 version of Microsoft Word. Again, you can download the sample files. Stacy has included the link in the chat from earlier. That is persistent and will be persistent and remain after the webinar. So if you have any issues accessing them now, you can totally view all of this stuff off when we're posting the recording and that kind of thing. And I'm going to do my best to go slow. I have a tendency to drink entirely too much coffee and fly through this stuff way too fast. So I'm going to do what I can do to take a deep breath and realize that people might be following along. So that all being said, just another quick couple of links. Again, these are all driving you to the same place that Stacy has provided in the text chat in Zoom. If you want a Google link, it's right there. Again, all of these are case sensitive. And the links are also included in the webinar reminder emails. So if we open our document, unaccessible document.docx, you'll notice that we have some issues. We'll notice that the headers aren't tagged correctly. Hyperlinks don't make sense out of context. The alt text for the images isn't correct. The image placement isn't accessible. The bottom footer text is way too small. That's a bonus. And the accessibility checker doesn't find all of the errors. Another point of context that I just wanted to give everyone is this is the unaccessible sample, unaccessible document on a Mac, and unaccessible document on a PC. They're very, very similar. We have basically our top bars are very similar. The application of the various header elements are very similar. And I just wanted to point that out is, is a lot of this stuff, whether you're working from Mac to PC, is all quite similar. All right, so here we go. So what we're going to do, and what I'm going to do, is we're basically going to work from our unaccessible document. And by doing that and going through all of these various steps, we're going to make the unaccessible document the accessible document. So if you all want to open up the unaccessible document, we're going to go through and fix all of these various issues. It should be fairly straightforward, and we're going to go slow. So once we have our unaccessible document open, you'll notice that while all of these things seem to look correct, they aren't, because if we look up here, and again, you might have to scroll or expand. Perhaps this is hidden. You might have to play around with it a little bit to get your ribbon to show. But what the point that I'm trying to make here is that even though these items are bigger and bold, and these items are slightly smaller, these aren't accessible because from a screen reader, there's no hierarchy attached to them. So what we're going to do is we're going to apply that hierarchy. So by selecting the text, we're going to simply click heading 1. And then if we want to, we can go back and we can center that. And basically what we've done is we've said, hey, assistive technology, this is a heading 1, and this takes priority over the subsequent heading 2. So if we wanted to do a heading 2, we would simply highlight the text, select heading 2. And then we're going to go ahead and repeat that with each heading throughout the document. And you'll notice there are 3 documents, three heading 2s on this document that we want to be sure that we get. And I'm going to give everyone about a minute or so if they want to follow along with that. And I will be right back. So that's been about a minute. I think it was actually more about 40 seconds, but I can't stand the silence. So what we're going to do is now we're going to move on to our hyperlinks. Now, if you'll notice that all of these hyperlinks that are throughout this document really don't make sense out of context. There are lots of click here's, there are lots of listed here's, there's a state, there's a name of a person. And while they are hyperlinked and they're hyperlinked correctly, they're not correct because they don't make sense out of context. So what we're going to do is we're going to remove them and then select what I think to be a much more applicable hyperlink. So listed here doesn't make sense out of context. So what we're going to do is highlight our listed here, and I'm going to right click and I'm going to remove hyperlink. Again, I'm going to right click and remove hyperlink. At some point, Microsoft Word will cooperate. There we go. So really what we were trying to say is that they're distinct from a lot of other cat breeds. So we don't really even need to say listed here in this context. So I'm just going to add a quick period. Get rid of that, add our space, and then, so how do we add a hyperlink, right? This is just, so we want our hyperlink to be a lot of other cat breeds, because that makes sense out of context. We want to know that the Selkirk Rex is a distinct cat breed from a lot of other cat breeds. So what I wanted to do here was highlight the fact that there are many other cat breeds. So what do you do? There are a couple of ways that we can add a hyperlink. We can right click and add the hyperlink in our submenu. Oh, sorry, I clicked the wrong thing. Again, right click, hyperlink down here, and then we merely add the address of where we're going to, somenicelink.com. All right, so we can add a hyperlink that way. We can also highlight, and we can go insert hyperlink from our navigation, or if you are a keyboard shortcut person like I am, on a Mac you can do, I think on a Mac or on a PC you can do Control K or Apple K. So that's one. So now we're gonna go through all of these, and what I like to do, is to go through here, and we're going to make each hyperlink better. So instead of state doesn't make sense out of context. State of Montana, however, would make sense out of context. If a screen reader read to me, link state of Montana, I would understand what that meant. So again, I'm going to remove my hyperlink by right-clicking remove hyperlink, and then we're going to add it back, and I'm going to do the right-click method. Right-click hyperlink. Again, you can do Control K, you can do Apple K, you can do insert hyperlink. All of the things bring you to the same spot of this insert hyperlink dialog box. So again, we're just going to insert my favorite link, somenicelink.com. And there we go. So again, moving down the document here, we can see Jerry Newman. Jerry Newman, love the name, love the lady, don't understand why she has a hyperlink. So link Jerry Newman, that's great, but what context is that placed in? So we want to know that the context is that she's a local Persian cat breeder, right? So again, we can right click, we can remove hyperlink, and we can select all of the text that we want to be hyperlinked. Again, I like local Persian breeder, comma, Jerry Newman. Again, I can right click, hyperlink. And then HTTP, somenicelink.com. Again, this would go to wherever you specified in your document. This is just for our going through this. And then we are going to, we see another click here, which is terrible. We never want to use click here's because I'm clicking here for what? So what I can do is really just take this out because I understand that we're talking about short hair cats. So if I remove this, I can go here and say Persian and British short hair ancestors. And again, I can go right click, hyperlink. I can also go insert hyperlink, which is what we'll do this time. And again, HTTP : and then the link, the destination of my choice. And we're going to apply that. So I'm going to give you guys about 30 seconds to pop through and make all of your adjustments. Okay, so now the next thing that I would like to talk about are our adorable cat images. And they're really great, except that the links are not accessible. So how do we fix that? So how I like to do it is I select the image, again, right click, and we're going to go to Format Picture. So that will open up a Format Picture sidebar. It might open up another little dialog window or something, depending on how you have your settings configured. And then we go to Layout and Properties, our Layout and Properties box. And then we go to Alt Text, and we'll see that even though this did have an alt text description, it was incorrect because picture one, if I was viewing this document with a screen reader, it would literally say image picture one. Does not help me in this context. So I could say something like orange-haired Selkirk Rex on a ledge. And that's a fairly accurate description of what's going on here. Again, as long as we're able to make sense, you know, I like to think about describing it as a visual. As a visual, what am I getting out of this image in context? You know, it might be worth saying, it might be worth describing how the cat's hair looks. That's kind of the point of the document, is that they're a little bit different and they look a little bit different than a normal cat, right? So anyway, you know, it's up to you. You can describe it however you want. The point is that we want to, with text, visually get across what the image is trying to convey in context. And again, so we've applied that. We're going to click our next image. Oh, and we'll see that, hey, this one has an alt text again, but it's picture 2, completely inaccessible. So how do we fix this? We would say, I would probably do something like a gray and white Selkirk Rex cat on Selkirk Rex cat sitting. Perhaps partial cat loaf, I'm not sure. But the point is, again, is that you want to visually, you want to text, describe in text what's going on in the visual. So this cat is gray and white and it's sitting. You might want to include that it's on a white background or something like that. But the point is that you want to be sure that you're adequately getting across what's going on in the image. So another thing that we need to look at here is that these images aren't aligned in text. So basically that's an accessibility issue, because if we go here, say we wanted to run a quick accessibility check. I'm doing this just for point here. On this version, you would go check for issues, and then you would go check accessibility. So if we go here, we'll see that picture 2 and 3 and 2 are objects not in line, right? So what we want to do is to put these items in line with text. And so how do we do that? Okay, so we're done formatting. We're done formatting here. Again, I've updated my alt text. How I got there, right click, format picture, opening my format picture, going to layout and properties, and then we're editing the description for the alt text, as not all screen readers will read title. So we always want to be sure to put alt text on description. So now we're going to take a look at how can we get these things in line, right? So there are a couple of different ways, but I think for me the most obvious way is we're going to right click again, and we're going to wrap text, and we're going to keep these in line with text. And so once we get these in line with text, we can go through, and I know that I want to put this here, and I can simply click and drag. There we go. And then while keeping this in line with text, I can go back to my home row and I can align center, but still keeping it in line with text. So this way, as a screen reader goes through, it's going to read, and get to the image, get to our image, read the alt text that we've appropriately captioned for this picture, and then proceed down the rest of the document. We're going to do the same with this cat too. So we click, wrap text, and then we're going to keep it in line with text. And then in the example, I put this little fella right before personality. So I'm going to go down here, I'm going to just make a little space, and I'm going to carefully drag my cat here, and then I'm going to center align. And now both of my cats are in line with text. and should be fully accessible via screen reader. I'm going to give you guys a little bit of time to do that on your own. Going to have about 40 seconds, and I am going to stop talking for a minute. Okay, so that's been as long of a silence as I could possibly stand. So what we're going to do now is part of what I did throw in here. There are two other items. And one is that if we look at our footer here, this footer isn't accessible because it doesn't meet the minimum font requirement. So when you're dealing with accessibility, you always want to have a minimum font size of approximately 12 pix or 12 point, which we can correct easily by just, if you have issues getting to the footer, you can just double click on top of the footer text. Microsoft Word should realize that you're trying to get into footers and headers. Open the footer and header bar, and then you can select the text just as like you do everything else, and then you can either adjust the text here, you can increase your font size, you can decrease your font size, but the point is that we always want to strive for a minimum font text size of 12 pixels, or 12 points as the case may be, depending on how you're working. So, you know, I touched on briefly that the accessibility checker doesn't find all of the errors. And I know that's sounds like I'm hating on the accessibility checker. And it's because I am partly, but it's important to realize that, you know, using things like technology to test accessibility isn't accurate all of the time. Basically, what's happening is the accessibility checker in here is running through the code that's behind all of this and is just figuring out if there's something that is there that shouldn't be there, or is there something there that doesn't really make sense out of context, or something like that. But it's not going to, like, as we saw, it's not going to tell you that your alt text is wrong, provided that you have an alt text. So, you know, it doesn't understand that picture 1 isn't an accessible use of an alt tag, because it just says, oh, yes, it does have an alt tag. It doesn't tell you the quality of it. So I think I'm gonna give you guys another 20 or 30 seconds just to poke around the various, you know, if you want to run accessibility checker, again, you can get to that. If you're set up like me here, you can go to File, you can go check for issues, check accessibility. If you are on a Mac, you can get to it by going to Review, and then check accessibility should be under Review. But I'm going to, okay, so I had originally had Stacy introducing the next part, but I think that she might be muted or something like that at the moment, and that's all fine. Oh, wait, we have Stacy.
I am ready. So,
okay, good deal.
You have control of the polls, so
I do. I have control over the polls, and so so here's Stacy. I'm going to quickly launch this poll, and here we go.
Okay. So before you answer anything, if you can just kind of listen, and we'll go through these directions for each of the questions. I'm really happy that you chose to join us this afternoon. And the first question is just for New Hampshire residents. So if you live or work in New Hampshire, I would really appreciate if you can answer question number 1 specifically, because this helps us with our particular ATN&H grant. So I'm going to explain it because the language is a little bit tricky. So the question is asking, how do you anticipate your outcome of participating in this training? So the first choice is, this means that either on a personal level, or when you're an individual, or at a corporate level, how will you use these skills to ensure accessibility? So it's IT and telecommunications, procurement or development policies, procedures, or practices will be improved or better implemented to ensure accessibility. So meaning you've learned these skills, you're now going to help to better implement, help to better ensure the accessibility in the documents that you are producing, in the documents of others around you, helping them to do that as well. So that may be what's going to be the outcome of this webinar. Doesn't mean you are now a pro at this. It means what you've learned, you're trying to improve what you were doing before. The next choice is that training will be developed or implemented to ensure accessibility of website software or other IT and telecommunication. So you may be someone on this webinar saying, hey, I'm going to take what I learned here, and now I'm going to train others in order to help them to make their documents more accessible. You also have a third choice, which outcome is unknown at this time. Thinking about what I just said, that is a choice. I would much prefer that you pick one of the other two, that you're hopefully going to do something with this information. And again, doesn't mean that you're going to be an expert at this. It just means you're helping to improve ensuring accessibility, or you're going to be doing training. So if our just New Hampshire residents can do number one at this point, Art, does it give them all of them?
Yes, I believe it does.
Okay, so if just New Hampshire residents can do number one, and then the rest of you, if you can answer 2 and 3. So number 2 is for everyone. Please indicate how satisfied you are with the overall of this session.
Oh, Stacy, it looks like there's a little bit of a glitch in that all of the participants seem to have to pick all 3 options.
Huh. That's a problem.
Yeah, that seems to be a pretty prevalent thought throughout all of the panelists that I'm getting, as the Zoom webinar chat is blowing up with people unable to submit without picking all 3.
All right, then here's what I'm going to ask, if everyone could be super understanding for this. I'm just going to have New Hampshire residents answer these 3 questions. And if you want to put into the comments how satisfied you are, that's great. Number 3 is we're looking at indicating your preference. We tried to do this as a hands-on webinar, which sounds kind of counterintuitive. If you really liked that, we would love to know that you liked that. Or if you didn't, then saying it was way too confusing, doing it hands-on, love to know those comments as well. So we welcome those comments. If I could just have New Hampshire residents answer these questions, and if the rest of you just want to comment or send me a separate email, that would be fine.
I feel a little bit, Stacy, like I'm trying to do like one of those nonprofit radio drives where it's like, we need to get at least 25% of the participants to
just New Hampshire.
Yeah.
So that would be great.
So yeah, just a quick shout out to everybody that is texting on the Zoom webinar chat. As soon as I end the poll will go away.
Okay.
But thank you guys for all of the comments. We really appreciate it.
And this is, we had a very high number of people who registered for this, which says to both Art and I that there is a need to do more webinars like this. So your feedback certainly will help, because we want to be doing more webinars like this.
Yeah, and it's definitely been somewhat of a stretch for us internally figuring out how to best do the talking and explaining, and then the other part where it's like the giving you guys all time to do and process this stuff on your own. So if we could have everybody, if you could please just throw out some comments in the Zoom webinar chat, that would be fantastic. Stacy, it looks like right now we have about 27% of everyone that has voted, so about 53 and counting. So why don't we give everybody another minute or so, and then we'll leave the last 5 minutes for some Q&A.
Okay, and there are some questions here in the Q&A. Some I've answered and some I was leaving for you, so we can go through those as well.
Yes, we will do. We will do that. We will. You guys should see my desk. It's amazing. I have so many pieces of paper everywhere. I have so many pictures of cats. Can I just say that? I have Selkirk Rex, the curly-haired little beauties everywhere. Anyway, I digress. It's worth saying that you guys should all know that I don't actually own a cat. I just think they're really cool. So anyway, I digress. I'm going to, Stacy, I'm going to go ahead and end the poll.
Okay, perfect.
And thank you guys so much for sharing that. We're going to continue on with sort of we're going to do some Q&A, and we're going to do a quick wrap up. So concerning the practical application, what did we do, right? We fixed the document headers for ease of use with assistive technologies. So one of the things that individuals that utilize assistive technologies can do is they can browse by just having it read the sections of the document. So I can have my, if I'm reading something on an iPhone using Rotor, I can say, hey, read me only the headers. So the assistive technology would say introduction, history, personality, and then you can navigate quickly to the section that you want it to read further. And so that's the important part of applying headers correctly, is that I'm able to navigate these things non-visually, or I'm able to better tab through them. Our hyperlinks can be read out of context now. So again, if I'm browsing all of these things, out of context, and I'm just having my assistive technology read me the links, I understand what you're trying to get me to look at and to read and to process. Screen readers will now produce meaningful results on images, and the placement of images will be correct. I can tell from the Q&A and the chat that nobody wants to place their images in line with text, and I understand your dismay at that little tidbit, but that's it's where we're at today, I think, and it might be different tomorrow, and that's not to say that there aren't screen readers that are more adept at putting images in line with text, but in the interest of creating the most accessible documents that we can for the broadest amount of users today, we keep our images in line with text. All of our fonts are also big enough now. They're all 12 point or 12 pixels greater than. And lastly, we've seen that accessibility checker isn't always perfect. And that wasn't quite lastly, but the lastly is that we strive for progress, not perfection. I think that's really the important part to remember, is that there's always things that we can do to make the things that we're trying to disseminate, and the websites that we make and the documents that we make, we're all in this to make everything as broadly accessible as we can. And that's done through progress. We're not going to create things that are perfect all of the time, but we can do what we can do every day to strive for that perfection. So lastly, I'm gonna go through some of the open Q&A for a couple of minutes. We really don't have a lot of time because I've yammered on for quite a while. So one question that I thought was really interesting was let me see where it was about PDFs. There's a lot of, I'm seeing a lot of things come up with PDFs, and I think that I've done a lot of research with PDFs, and it's interesting because not all of the features that you bake into a Word document are carried over. So it's often worthwhile to do another round of accessibility testing on all of your PDFs. And again, Stacy and I will look into doing a practical application of document accessibility in Adobe Acrobat. I think that might be a really useful and worthwhile thing, as PDFs are just sort of the go-to for dissemination in terms of document. And there's a whole host of features that one can enable and doing that. So it's definitely worth exploring. So let's see, what else do we have? What else do we have?
Can you see the Q&A?
I can.
Okay, perfect.
I am not sure if there is an accessibility checker using Word Online. That is something that I haven't looked with. I've had some very choppy experiences using Word Online, and that seems to be my thing, is that if I'm doing something like accessibility remediation, I would want to do that on the actual software. One question that was just asked was, the webinar focused on documents. Are there similar practices for websites? And the answer is a very large and resounding yes. All of these items are applicable to HTML on websites. So there are plenty of resources out in the on the interwebs concerning online accessibility for websites. A great resource is called webaim.org, webaim.org. That's a fantastic resource. Lots of universities, such as the University of Michigan and Penn State, also have wonderful resources for online and document accessibility. So I would really urge everyone on here to take a look at all of that stuff. It also does look like Microsoft Word Online does have an accessibility checker, so that might be worth also pointing out. So it's 4:01. We are out of time for today. Stacy and I will attempt to comb over the questions and get back to as many as that we can. We really appreciate you guys reaching out to us, and thank you for watching. Please email us with any questions, comments, concerns. If you need anything at all, really, we are here for you guys. So that all being said, this webinar has been recorded, and we will send out the links to that, as well as the documents, and we will post that online as quickly as we can, and we will get all that stuff out to you guys. So thank you so much for viewing. My name is Art Frick. Stacy's info is there. And thank you guys so much. We really appreciate you joining us, and have a great afternoon.